Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are you're looking forward for this event. I'm happy to welcome you in this solution-driven water journalism panel discussion. I would like to introduce you first to the panelists we are having today. We have a very high level in this panel. First of all, we have Malak Al-Taeb. She's an analyst at Storyzai, independent writer and researcher from Libya. She's based in Paris, in France now, and she holds a master's degree in environmental policy, so from Sciences Po. So I hope she will shed some light into the topic. Then we also have Erika Gies. She's an award-winning independent journalist, and she's based in the States. She writes about water, climate, and other environment-related topics. I will add Erika to say hello to the audience.
Hi, good to be here.
Glad to have you, Erika. We also have Aline Busman. She's the co-director at CWAS, and she has more than 12 years of experience as a resource management expert and business development. And her expertise is on Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Africa. So I'm sure she will give a lot of useful information in this panel. Hello, Aline. Welcome.
Hi, Marta. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure.
And then we also have John Alterman. He's a senior vice president at CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's based in the States as well, and he's the director of the Middle East program at CSIS. So, of course, also another knowledgeable panelist. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Dr. Maha Zoubi. She's also very knowledgeable on the topic. She has a PhD from the University of Cagliari in environmental design, and she has over 15 years of experience in planning, designing, and managing. So she's also specialized in water topics, in water innovation topics. So for sure, she will be also very, very useful to give some light to the topic. Welcome, Maha.
Thanks, Marta. Looking forward for a great discussion.
Yes. And I will introduce myself as well. I'm Marta Castillo. I'm a communications officer at REVOLVE, the group behind the AMWAJ initiative. We are a water initiative, like the AMWAJ Alliance is a Mediterranean water initiative focused on constructive and innovative communication. So we aim to ensure reliable and impactful communication about the water challenges we face in the region, in the Mediterranean. And also we want to inspire actions towards sustainable water management. That's why we are here today. We're happy to be here, to be moderating this panel. And we're looking forward to start this session. I will just introduce briefly how the session will go, so the audience knows what to expect. I will be just asking questions to the panelists that they will be answering. I will launch one question for each of them, and then, of course, there will be time for them to answer to the question that was not directed to them. And then we will have 15 minutes at the end for Q&A from the audience. So if you have any questions, you can just drop them in the chat that you have on YouTube, on the live on YouTube. So we will gather them all and launch them to the perspective or more like the panelists that can answer better the question. So that's it. That's all I wanted to say. And we don't have much time. And we have a lot of good minds in this panel and a lot of experience and knowledge to share. So I will like just to go to the questions and to start the panel. So I will start with Aline. I will put you here. I think to start with this panel, like to land a bit in the topic, it would be good to have like a good definition of water innovation. Like what is water innovation and what is really the criteria that we need for to classify an water solution as innovative. I guess you can give us a lot of information on that, Aline.
To a very easy question. Thank you, Marta. It's great to be joining you all today. And although I'm the first person here to be asked, I might not be the most innovative person in the room. And I'm actually glad to know that many of those who are actually providing real innovative water solutions are here, and also those that have great tools to get them out to the world are also here. And I will just try to shed some light from my and from Siva's experience. Now, we're talking about two words, water and innovation. And I think for most people, these words are not necessarily connected. So water innovation is not a term that speaks for itself. Why is that? I think there are actually many reasons, but there is one quite simple one that is good to keep in mind. So water is heavy. And other than energy that you can just quite simply distribute at a high speed, water takes a lot of energy and infrastructure to be made available in the right quality and quantity. And this made water always a very localized resource, a localized good, and one that is handled by actors who try their best to provide it, but are also not necessarily taking a lot of risk or being the most innovative ones. So this is just one reason why the sector is not traditional innovative, but it is an important point to understand that the sector needs more and new solutions on the ground, and this is what we call innovation, to make sure that water is sufficiently there for people and for planet. And I think this is slowly but maturely happening. And let me maybe mention three things that I associate with innovation in the sector. The first is mindset. The second one is business models for the water sector. And the third is understanding water as a service. Now, let's start with the mindset. This is crucial when we think about where innovation begins. We need to recognize the value of water. So water cannot be simply provided everywhere abundantly and for free. It's limited and no one has the capacity to do so. So we need to attach a value to water, which is related to its market price, but of course also considers social, environmental, and economic aspects. And then we look at more solutions that we can provide for communities, feasible models to provide services, but also policies and regulations that can facilitate innovations. But all this is only possible if we really, in our mind, recognize the value of water. Now, the second one are the business models. We had so many technology innovations in the water sector in the last 20 years, but we had a very low adaptation rate of these technologies. And I think we have been just looking at one area of innovation in the technology area, which is important, and innovation is happening there. But innovation around business models has not happened at the same pace. And this is where we hindered adaptation and development. So we had new technologies, but we didn't look into new pricing, new partnerships, new financing solutions, etc. And this is where so much innovation is needed and has high potential. Now, the third one is water as a service. I think it's very short-sighted if we think of water as a product, and the innovation aspect becomes much stronger if we understand water as a service, especially when we think of making a difference, integrating, for example, information management, water reuse, distribution at the point of use, or decentralized treatment solutions. Such solutions can help us not only to adapt the technology, but also generate additional revenue streams or reduce costs. And this again can help to scale services and make them more feasible. So essentially, I don't think there is one definition or one set of criteria that defines water innovation, but there is a framework in which we as CWAS see innovation happening. And this means seeing that ideas are being transformed into practical reality. And I think only then innovation can really respond to the needs of people and environment.
Thank you, Aline. I think it was very, very useful to set the ground to the discussion. I will also pass the floor to Erika, because I think she has also some information to add in this topic.
Hi.
Hello, Erika.
Yeah, I wanted to add a little bit more to what Aline said about mindset. I've spent the past couple of years reporting a book that will be out next May called Water Always Wins. And it focuses on nature-based solutions to water management. So you may have heard of that as green infrastructure, low impact design, natural infrastructure, water sensitive urban design. So when we're talking about water innovation, I would like to encourage people to think about the way in which our engineering has caused a lot of water problems. That's things like, dams and levees, but also pavement in cities. And so nature has the ability to deliver many of the services that we want if we allow natural systems to function. A lot of our problem solving tends to be really single focused. So we're trying to solve one problem, like eliminate, a certain type of pollution from water, or prevent flooding in a particular area. And when we have, or generate hydropower, when we have these single-minded solutions, we tend to negatively impact the natural system, which is very complex. So to the extent that we can make space for nature within our human habitats, it can deliver water cleaning capabilities. It can deliver flood absorption. It can deliver water storage for later. So the innovators that I interview and look at in my book are doing this in many different ways. And some of them are actually looking to older human technologies. So one chapter I have focuses on Peru and indigenous people in the Andes who would capture water and move it underground to slow it down, which has corollaries in the Middle East with some of the systems in Iran, Oman, etc. So that's one thing I would encourage people to think about, and just thinking about nature as a partner when you're considering water solutions, and maybe taking a step back from thinking that technology will save us from everything, because often technology ends up creating knock-on consequences.
Thank you, Erika. Yes, very, very important that reflection that you did. Technology is not the end in itself. We have to keep it human as well. I think Dr. Mahas also has something to add to the discussion, so I will also pass the floor to her.
Thanks, Erika. Just like adding to what my colleagues mentioned, from research for development plans, like first we have to admit that water is not a standalone, let's say, sector or ecosystem. It's interlinked with various sectors like energy, like food, health, social, economic activities. So that's why when we are talking about innovation related to the water sector, we are talking about, like, it could be policy innovation, it could be business model, it could be as well something that like a new technology, new product. So like always, innovation should be a demand driven. It's driven by demand on ground, and it could touch various let's say scales. It could help farm level farmers. It could help at policy level. So it is various. I would just give as well, like few examples of like currently emerging, let's say, innovation, like using solar power for irrigation in remote areas that help farmers to, let's say, reduce their energy bill. It could be using water-saving technology in irrigation that reduce water usage, however, still give same agriculture productivity. It could be using weather stations for flood protection in areas with a high risk of floods. It could be irrigation advisory application that help farmers how much water they use, which crop they have to let's say, grow this season, so on and so forth. So, and the criteria for how can I see the innovation? It's more about demand-driven. It should respond to local, let's say, problems, create jobs sometimes, cost effectiveness, as well, enhance resource utilization. It could be as well helping mitigate environmental impact. So this is how, from research for development lens, I could say a few words about water innovation.
Thank you, Dr. Maha. Of course, it's a it's a wide topic, and we could be discussing about this for longer. But I would like to jump to the next questions, more focused on media and communication. So that's also the topic we want to touch today. So I hope we set the ground a bit with this first question and this. I think very useful and full of knowledge, that information that you shared. But I would like to jump to the more the media work on water communication, so water journalism, let's say. And I would like to ask to John. Then I will also ask Erika, because she's for sure, as she already shared, the most knowledgeable in this field, I think, on journalism in this panel. So, but first I would like to ask John about what he thinks, how successfully are media platforms, we keep it wide, media platforms as print, digital, covering water-related stories, and how can more demand for these water-related stories be created? That would be useful for our startups in the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Erika, the question of how they're covering it, because I think she's, as a producer, is much better equipped to answer that question. But the question of how do you create demand? I think that there are several problems. One is people look and they say, it's all impossible. There are too many problems. The Middle East is full of problems, and there's nothing we can do. And that doesn't generate stories. So I think that there has to be a kernel of possibility. And I think you also have to link it to things that people already know they care about. There's something sort of mundane about water and sewage and things like that. It sounds like something that somebody else should take care of. And I think at CSS, we've been very successful linking issues of environment to issues people already know that they care about, issues like quality of governance or Jawdat al-Hukum in the Middle East. We did a report called Sustainable States that looks at environment governance and the future of the Middle East. And we've been very successful getting senior people to engage because they know they care about those issues. And if there is a way for water and realistic, affordable, scalable solutions in the water sector to move forward on some of these big, seemingly intractable issues, that's a way to get environment and water into the conversation. When people would say it's not really a water conversation, you can make it a conversation that is relevant to water, because water is relevant to solving a lot of the bigger challenges or addressing a lot of the bigger issues that people are concerned with. And why don't I defer to Erika on the question of how well people are doing and what they're doing.
Hi, can you hear me? I couldn't hear Marta this then. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I really liked what John said about, water is something that people think other people should care about. They hope that when they turn on their taps, clean water comes, and that when they need sewage treatment, it's handled and they don't have to deal with it. So I think there's a lot of truth in that. One thing that can really get people to care about water is when they have problems with water, when it doesn't work correctly. So that might be flood, drought, or a significant pollution problem, whether that's affecting agriculture or in people's homes in the cities. So I think those problems are an opportunity to get the general public to care about water. But the result ends up being that a lot of journalism focused on water issues does look at problems. And this is common to journalism generally, that problems are sort of what sells or what people are used to addressing in journalism. However, there is an increasing focus on what's called solutions journalism. And in fact, I believe there's, I think it's called the Solutions Journalism Network in the United States, that is looking specifically at ways to solve largely environmental problems, but also social problems as well. And of course, water has overlap in both of those. And I would just add one other thing, which I think is a potential hook to get people interested in water issues, which is climate change. And of course, we know that climate change is amplifying floods and droughts. The atmosphere can hold more water. That's why we're seeing these big deluges. That's why we're seeing dry places getting drier. So I think people are starting to understand that link, and journalists can explain that further. And then there's also the issue of like how natural ecosystems, in fact, store a lot of carbon dioxide, and land-based change has contributed more than a quarter of our greenhouse gas emissions. We primarily talk about energy, but land use change for cities and agriculture, in fact, are causing a lot of carbon dioxide emissions. And the same natural ecosystems like wetlands, forests, et cetera, that can help us provide, capture, and store and clean water, also store carbon dioxide. So it's a multiple solution. And one other facet is biodiversity, which some people care about more than others, but biodiversity does supply a lot of the services that humans require, from pollinating our food to cleaning water, et cetera. So the extent to which journalists can show that like a natural water-based solution, for example, can provide all of those things at once, I think those are additional opportunities for engaging the public on these issues.
And let me just add one thought to Erica's excellent list, and that is the approach you take depends on the audience you want. I mean, there is an audience for how do I make sure that water comes out of the tap when I turn on? How do I make sure sewage is properly disposed of? There's an audience for the food issues. There's an audience for governance issues. There's an audience for different things. And I think the angle you take has to be governed not by what you're interested in, but the hook has to come for whose decision am I trying to change? And what would it take to change that decision? The more you connect to your audience, the more effective your journalism is going to be, and the better audience you're going to have for your journalism.
That's an excellent point. Absolutely.
Thank you both. I think like the combination of the knowledge of both of you was very useful to answer this question. I will now jump to the next question, and I will present Malak for the first time in the panel. I will pass the floor to her. I would like to keep delving into this topic on the media and water journalism. So the topic today is shifting the media focus from water issues to water solutions. We want to understand how we can take the media focus more on the things that we are doing right, and not only in the catastrophic side of water issues. I would like to ask you, Malak, in your opinion, like, why do media platforms tend to put the focus more on the water challenges and not showcasing the water solutions and innovations that are a lot, as we all know.
Thank you, Marta. Answering your question, I mean, personally, I've been doing journalism independently and also research from a policy perspective, focusing on water issues, especially in Libya. And I think, as Erica mentioned earlier, that it's more how journalism is structured in general, that journalism focuses more on the issues that are happening within a specific geographical location. If it's a local media outlet, or even if it's an international media outlet, they would focus on the challenges faced regarding water issues, whether it's water shortage, whether it's related to flooding, whether it's related to wastewater and how we can treat it, and so on. So I think it's the overall structure, but it's more about raising awareness among journalists in general, not only to focus on the challenges that are happening within the local level, but more of understanding, as John earlier said, the audience. What kind of audience? I mean, farmers would be interested to know more solutions regarding water conservation, for example. So they wouldn't really want to know all the issues because they are aware of the issues that are present. But I think it's more about raising awareness among journalists, and especially local independent journalists, to not only focus on the challenge, but to always ask how or what kind of solution is available on a local level. So if, for example, speaking from Libya's perspective, if someone is in the capital or Tripoli or Benghazi, they need local journalists. They need not only to cover the usual water issues, but they need to always bring up the question of what kind of solution is available and how we can shed light on that solution and link it to the problem, and also how to bring out all different stakeholders into this problem, or let's say solution-driven water story.
Okay, thank you, Malak.
Yeah.
I guess you're not having any connection issues.
No.
Okay, so I will pass the floor to Erica, because I am sure she has also more to add to the topic. So I will give you the floor, Erica.
Okay, it's true. If you think about why journalism started, it was largely to hold people in power to account on behalf of the public. And so that background explains why so much of journalism is focused on calling attention to problems and letting the public know that these are problems and that something needs to be done about them. And the solutions don't always happen in journalism. They don't often happen in journalism. You know, they happen at city government levels, higher government levels, you know, policy institutes. And sometimes that can get coverage from journalism as well, but it can be a little harder. So one example is, you know, I have covered water tech innovation, and I've also covered renewable energy innovation quite a bit because I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, where a lot of that kind of stuff happens. And, you know, there's so many startups, there's so much innovation happening. And what editors tell me when I pitch them a story on some upstart's great new idea, you know, they want to know, has it been deployed? That yes, they want to see a pilot, but more they want to see evidence that it's going to be a significant solution, not just, you know, an idea that never goes anywhere. So that might mean getting that policy piece or that financing piece in place to build out the project before it gets significant media coverage. And one other thing I would say about water issues, in terms of the local versus national or international audience, a lot of the publications I write for do have a national and international audience. I'm not so much doing like local newspaper or television or radio coverage. But water issues are very bespoke to the local place, you know, the local ecology, the local geology, you know, the local weather, whether it's an area with too much water or not enough. And so an international or national outlet, you know, you might focus on a specific place to kind of tell that story, but it needs to have broader implications. So that can be a little bit of a challenge since water issues are so specific to each place. There are commonalities, but sometimes it can be a little difficult to convince an editor that you can make that argument as well.
Thank you, Erika. Also very useful. I will pass it to Dr. Maha because she also has some knowledge on this topic, and I'm sure she would like to add to what Erika and Malak already said. So floor is yours.
Thanks, Marta. Actually, in addition to what being mentioned, actually, I need just to give an example that despite we are looking for a balanced media coverage between it's not only about challenge, talking about water challenge, we need as well to focus on solutions. But we have to admit sometimes media actually have a strong power and have an impact actually in changing users' behaviors. For example, I will give an example from California when researchers back in 2018 conducted a research to see the impact of the media coverage on let's say the link between the drought and the users' behaviors. Have it been changed? So they took the study and covered between 2005 and 2015. Where there was two drought waves hit California. Between 2007 and 2009, there was the election, presidential election, so the coverage was not that much in terms of the water issue and the drought. However, in 2011 and 16, the coverage was very huge about the problem. So researchers or the result revealed that there is a strong link between the coverage, the media coverage, highlighting the issue and the problem, and how that impacts the reduction in water usage on a daily, let's say, and a monthly basis. So both it could be a strong weapon, to be honest, media coverage, either to highlight the issue and have an impact, or sometimes it didn't if we are not having a balanced coverage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maha. I will just pass it quickly to John because he also has a short comment to make on the topic.
I think it's important to keep in mind human psychology. And there's an expression in journalism, if it bleeds, it leads. There's something about human psychology that likes looking at other people who are more unfortunate and saying, Alhamdulillah, it's not me. Ya khasara, it's horrible, it's happening to them. But I think there's a whole school of journalism. We see a lot of it in the Afghanistan coverage in the last week, where people are interested because they say, it's horrible, it's happening to them. Thank God I'm safe, it's not happening to me. But there's another kind of journalism that Erika was suggesting that I think is very powerful. That is, if I do something, I can change something. I think that's also very, very powerful in human psychology. And to the extent you can write about how the reader's individual actions can begin to change the world, that's a very powerful way to push aside the bad news and get people to accept a lot of the more innovative possibilities and the possibility that they can take action that will change their circumstances.
Thank you, John. Yeah, definitely very, very important to keep that in mind. And I think that's also the reason why we also should keep human stories local, so we can identify ourselves with those stories and we can see what we can do to improve the situation around us. So yeah, definitely very important. Thank you, John. And I will pass it to Malak now first to ask her what are the capacities that the journalists need to have to, let's say, to master the art of covering water stories through this constructive lens that we are saying? Like, what do you think it's needed or is missing, let's say, in journalism?
Okay, so in terms of covering water stories, I think one of the hardest things that I have noticed is that in terms not only just connections, because sometimes you have enough connections to get to people or to get to an area that you want to report in terms of a water-related issue story that you want to highlight. But sometimes I think journalists need to make sure that they will get all the aspects covered that they need in the story. And they also need to think of inclusion. I mean, how we can include different variables, because sometimes when we talk about water issues, we try to bring experts like scientists, or you want to bring a water engineer, or you want to bring a policy person, so you can link the issue with like the governmental level. But I think it's more about how you can use the network in order to highlight and include all different levels of people, especially those directly impacted by the water issue, and understand what they have in mind, because it's not only on the governmental level. There's always this kind of linkage between water issues and solutions in terms of being tackled by the government, and how we can just keep it on a higher level. But we only need to understand what kind of problems present through the locals. But I think it's more about how you interlink all different aspects, or all social aspects in your story, and not only focusing on an expert linked to this issue, because all people are affected in one way or another by a water issue. And we always, sometimes in terms of water stories, we forget the human factor, and we think of the more technical aspect, what is the problem and how we can solve it. But there is a human factor involved, and we need to understand the different mentalities when it comes to covering a water issue. So it's not only always technical or policy focused, but we need to think of the ordinary people who consume water on a daily basis, what kind of understandings they have, and how we can use that to link it to our story. So this is something that I think journalists need to keep in mind, that it's not always policy driven or technology driven, but how we can mix even how we can make it social driven, but at the same time, it's still linked with innovation in order to be solved in a very innovative way through even the local mindset. And then how we can actually even keep it still connected to those from a governmental level. So I think when we think of networks and how we can cover this story, we need to think of all different aspects that are linked to this water issue. So if I'm covering a water problem somewhere, I don't only think of the governmental level, or maybe an engineer who worked on a water facility that is facing an issue. I need to think of everyone involved. So yeah, this is what I think. I think it's more of linking all aspects, and also to keep the human factor, which we sometimes overshadow.
Yeah, I think it goes very much in line with what John was mentioning before as well. To keep it human and not so focused on technology.
Exactly,
is definitely the key to make the stories resonate on people's mind. I will pass it to Eric as well, because I guess as a journalist, you will have something to add to what Malak was saying, I guess, based on your experience as a professional. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think journalists do look for the human aspect, most of them. I mean, it depends on how long your story is and how much space you have, but people care about people. And so when you can bring a person alive in your story, that helps readers to care about what you're writing about. And from a solutions perspective, that might not focus so much on the people who are impacted. It might focus on the people who are coming up with the solutions. So, you know, if I am talking to an innovator about their new idea, I might ask about their childhood and what led them to become interested in this and what obstacles that they overcame to try to, you know, get this idea into the world. And so that is a device that journalists use frequently to engage people with their stories. And then I would encourage people to think about another being, if you will. So some of the indigenous people that I interviewed for my book told me, you know, the kind of modern world tends to think of water as a commodity or, you know, a service, but a lot of indigenous cultures think of water as a who, as a relative, you know, as an auntie or a grandmother. And when you approach water with that attitude, you think of it as a being or an entity with its own agency, with its own, you know, ways that it's seeking a path through the landscape and interacting with rocks and microbes and animals and humans. And I think if you're thinking about water in that way, you know, you're more likely to think of the systems that I was talking about earlier, and these complex systems in which water, if you want a healthy water cycle, you need to keep these systems healthy. And so, you know, if you're nothing against engineers, they do a lot of great work, but if you're only interviewing an engineer, then you're getting a very specific kind of problem solving, single problem solving kind of perspective. If you're thinking of the water as the who, then maybe you're thinking about the other ways in which water is interacting with a specific landscape.
Thank you, Erika. Yeah, that's very, very useful what you said. And it's a change of perspective that we might forget in our daily lives or in our contexts, that we don't consider water as such, as a who, as an auntie. So now I will pass it to Aline to ask, let's say, the second part of the question, that it would be like, how can we introduce this concept of water innovation to young journalists? I guess you've had a lot of experience working with startups and innovative, young, innovative professionals. So.
Yes, I think what we're doing right now, meeting here, is exactly what we are trying to develop and test formats and concepts of collaboration, where we don't only look at water innovation as this abstract topic or as a report from the government or as a research in the shelf of a university, but we are in touch or closely working with those that are already innovating solutions. And those might be young, powerful companies, those might be impactful NGOs, this might be larger corporates that are introducing a new way of bringing their solution into the market. And I think we are trying to help identify those type of innovators and actors and help to co-create content with them, because they're already there. And I think Erika said it nicely, they can also be a heart or a piece of what could be developed as a story. And I think we are trying to establish these linkages, because they have these solutions at hand, and they have from very localized personal stories to stories that are disruptive on a regional level until decision-making level. I think there's a lot in there already. Most of them don't have the channels, the audience, the creativity necessarily to communicate as journalists could do. And I think this is where we are trying to create this linkage. And the work of journalists is so powerful because it does not only, and I like this comment that was raised before, it does not only influence how communities or users could adapt and benefit from innovations and solutions, but it can really develop markets for these solutions to scale much further. And here, this is something where without the journalism, we would probably take much slower steps. I think this is, from a top level, the main rationale for us also to be here today with all of you.
Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, definitely, that's an important exercise that we are doing today to make this innovation get to the young journalist. I will go to final questions. So then we will get the questions from the audience, and I think there are a few already. And I would like to ask Dr. Maha, how does water research make its way to the media platform, and what are the gaps that we see between the research and the media sector? Because I guess this is always an issue, that there is a lot of research, a lot of good numbers and statistics and papers and reports written, but then this doesn't get to the general public because there is a gap between journalists and researchers. So I guess you can tell us a lot about that.
Yes, sure. Actually, because we are dealing with different ecosystem as researchers or journalism, or journalists. So, like for example, and how each ecosystem is perceived the other is really crucial and important. For example, let's say media or journalists, they argue that research findings lack usually from news value, or it is not backed properly, or in a way that can attract readers or whomever is listening to the news. And researchers sometimes say that journalists are just interested in shiny, bright objects or a news. So this is reality. But definitely, we have to admit that research brings objectivity and accuracy in a news reporting. So a good story is always the outcome of research and investigation. But the gap actually, we used to have it, and maybe that will stay for a longer time, as long as we both journalist and researcher look to the issue from different angles, the way they describe it. Let's say journalist is more description, however, researcher is more like analysis with more, let's say, evidences to back up the result and validate the result. The time frame different between journalists and researchers. Journalists, they depend like which institution they are working and sometimes they need like a quick news to publish. However, researchers, it took them months and sometimes years to come up with let's say valid result and that they can publish. Further, researchers usually they build on research and research questions and results based on theory basis. However, journalists not necessarily they are using that kind of theory to build their news. So we need to develop a deeper relation between journalists and researchers. It could be through common platforms where we can bring them together. They can listen to each other more and more. That would build, let's say, a network, build partnership between both, and it should built as well on the trust and respect for each other. So this is just a quick highlight where the gap exists between the two ecosystems.
Thank you, Maha. I will just pass it quickly to Erika so she can show us, let's say, the other side of this issue, because I'm sure she's been dealing with researchers as a journalist. So yeah, I would like to.
It was very interesting to hear Dr. Maha talk about these two ecosystems and getting journalists and scientists together. In fact, there's an organization in the United States called Compass that does just that. And I have participated as a journalist, and it's basically teaching scientists how to communicate to journalists. And, you know, journalists are a proxy for the public, right? We're doing our work to serve the public. So there are very different ways of doing this. I would say one thing is, in the scientific culture, there has historically been this idea that you do your work, you put your work out there, and it's up to other people to say, you know, how it might be used in policy or in the real world. But increasingly, scientists who want to see their work have an impact need to be willing to take that step to explain, you know, this innovation could be used in this way, it could have these kinds of impacts. And I think there are ways to do that while still feeling comfortable with your scientific integrity. One thing that can help is if you have a good PR team, public relations at your university or your research institution. I subscribe to something called Eureka Alert, and it's a list of scientific studies in the areas that I cover that comes to me in my email every day. And there is like a PR description which explains some of its relevance, you know, where it comes from, where it could be used. And that's one place that I get story ideas. I would say there are definitely publications, including ones I write for, that cover breaking science like that, that's published in some of the journals. You know, I think it tends to be North American or European focused, so that is potentially an issue. But another thing you can do is cultivate relationships with reporters who care about your subject. So if someone interviews you, you can stay in touch with them and let them know when you have research coming up. As a journalist, I want to have the story first. And if you wait until I get it in my notifications, all the other journalists are going to see it. And there's maybe like 2 or 3 days to produce the story. If you tell me it's coming, you know, months or at least weeks in advance, I have the chance to, especially as a freelancer, pitch it, find a good home for it, develop a really unique, innovative story. And, you know, not all journalists are equal. Not all journalists are going to be interested in what you're doing. And so that's why it's important to read journalism and find the journalists who are covering the kind of work that you do.
Thank you, Erika. Thank you, Maha. I think it was very, very, very useful what you said for both the journalists and the innovators we have today. I will go now to the questions of the audience. So I see that, well, you put it, Sam, in the chat. I will just go for the first one from Marian Ben Hamza. She's asking to all the panelists, so I don't know who will be willing to answer first. What can be done from aside from reporting that is needed to drive more capital allocation for water service innovation? So I don't know who is willing to answer this question. Maybe Dr. Maha or John. I will just share it with both of you. So what can be done aside from reporting to drive more capital to water service innovation from your perspective?
I'm just reading, actually, trying just to, like, aside from, like, if you allow me, John, I can just, like, quickly, like, aside from reporting, actually, journalists are very important to highlight, let's say, issues as related, let's say, to the water when it comes to more capital to be allocated for such, highlighting success stories, highlighting the issue in a way that looking for a solution, sometimes that drag attention, because media is the more, it's actually a very strong power to reach out to policymakers, to donors, to research development, to international organizations. So the way we can bring the problem in a way that there is some efforts being done at a country level, for example, that still required this, let's say, list of points or list of gaps in terms of financial resources, in terms of capacity. So we highlight exactly where is the problem. It's not just generalizing the problem. Sometimes we need to go deeper and see, like, here, where is the bottleneck to be able to drive more, or to get more attention, or let's say drive more capital allocation for water services and innovation in a country level, for example. So we need to be more specific and focus, and report it in a way that it's a demand driven. So it's not about like sometimes the way we go out to the public. It is very important how we address which messages we need out, and the way we address the problem as well, like how can we address it, not just where, what we need, as well how. So maybe that's a point we need to consider as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Maha. And I hope this answered the question from Miriam. And the next one, well, I don't know if Aline has something to build on this one, but I will just quickly jump to the next one, and then if Aline has something to add to this one, I will pass the floor to her. So next one, it's directed to John. So Hafawa Rehmi is asking that in Tunisia, most international donors have a say when it comes to water, sanitation, and waste management. And this is creating confusion in the public debate and for journalists. So how can we report? I mean, I guess he's referring to Tunisians, or how we, the general public, report on those foreign inputs that sometimes are so different or contradictory.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. The first question is, so what audience would make a difference? I think you can argue. I think the argument you're making is you need to reach the audiences that are decision-making in the donor countries. So it's a little bit different kind of journalism. I think the story of donor coordination is actually a story that can be told really well with individuals, with characters, with conflicts, with consequences. But you have to have a good sense for what the donor community thinks it's doing, what it wants to avoid doing. There has to be a sense of impact, and it has to get to the point that I was talking about earlier, of the sense of personal empowerment. If I do this, that will change. And you want to get to the donors, and you want to persuade the donors, if I do this, that will change. So I think there's a really good way to tell that story, with really concrete examples, with results that affect individuals who you can portray, as Erica was saying, as sort of full-fledged individuals with real characters. I think there's a great way to tell it. What you can't do is have it look like an auditor's report. But journalists don't do auditor's reports. I think all the storytelling skills you've learned in other places push toward the home audiences of the donors and say, the money can do so much more and avoid all these problems. Here's a way to do it. I think you can be really, really successful. You can find an audience. People are concerned about environment. People are concerned about government waste. You take those initial things they already care about and you tie it into a story with an audience in mind. I think you can be very, very successful, but you have to be intentional. As I say, think about how not to make it an auditor's report. Think about how to make it a story with a solution at the end that the reader can help implement.
Thank you, John. I think that will answer perfectly the question. And I will just pass it quickly to Aline, because I think she has something to add to the first question on how to drive more capital for water service innovations.
Yes, I think it very much links to the initial point where I mentioned we need to have a value attached to water and think of how we provide water as a service. Because if we just look at it as a sector where we put in a lot of grants and try to provide centralized services, it's not going to work. It's not going to be sufficient. So we're looking a lot also with financing and investment partners into blended finance models on the large scale. So merging grant and governmental finance together with private capital that is looking at the commercial aspect of the water service, but also at the impact. And we're doing this at the small scale also for water businesses, looking at how can they find a feasible model that is at least to a certain extent commercial enough to sustain itself and potentially also raise external investment. So that's definitely a new type of financing coming into a sector that has not looked at from a very commercial perspective before. And I think it's not a trade-off in terms of commercial or impact. It should be both.
Thank you, Aline. I think with that, we finished. We covered what we wanted to cover in this session. That, of course, it's never enough, and we could have been discussing about this exciting topic for a lot more, I'm sure. But that's the time we had. We had 1 hour. So thank you all for watching, and I hope this sheds some light on water journalism, and that both journalists and startups are now more encouraged to share stories and on a constructive way, as we were discussing. And see you next time. Thank you all.